Hi, I'm Alessia, and you're about to watch a message that was preached at Calvary Fellowship in Miramar, Florida. At Calvary, we exist to help you take your next step with God. If you'd like to learn more about Calvary, make sure to download our mobile app on the App Store or Google Play Store by searching up My Calvary.
How's everybody doing? Hey, we are glad that you're here. So I've got to tell you a story to open this, but I have to tell you something, if you've been around Calvary for a while, something you've probably heard before, so I can tell you the second part, which is the part you haven't heard, but if I tell you the second part, it doesn't make any sense without the first part. We good? Okay, we're starting. So it was December 5th, 1992. That's the day that my wife and I met. It was kind of this chance meeting at a mutual friend's house. We both were friends with this guy, but we had never met. So we went to this guy's house. He was throwing a party. We had never been to his house before, or have never been there since. So it was like this preordained moment. But anyway, so I was in a band. This guy had just bought a guitar. His parents were out of town. He bought a guitar. He says, "Bob, check out my guitar." So I grab the guitar and I start playing it, and a crowd begins to form at his house. So a crowd begins to form, and then this very, very beautiful woman just walks away, and she leaves, and then she goes and sits down on the other side of the room. So now I'm very interested in what's going on the other side of the room. So I put the guitar down, I sit next to her, and I introduce myself, and we just start talking, this and that, and she tells me that she loves school, and she's on a scholarship. She's on a full scholarship to FAU, and I had just finished my 5th year of high school at the time, and she starts telling me how great college is, how much she loves school, loves her classes, and then she asks me, "So, Bob, do you like school?" Now, you got to understand, guys say things, especially when they're mesmerized by a woman's beauty. And I said, "Do I love school? I go to school more than anyone I know." And I said, I love everything about school. I mean, there are teachers and classes and pencils and all of it. I love everything. And here's the thing is that, and I just went on and on about how much I loved school. And she's like, "Wow, I just didn't, you're this musician. I just didn't expect you to love school." You know me. I'm very unexpected. I don't even know what I'm going to say next. And so now, the truth is, what happens is I became a Christian about 6 months later. And I ended up transferring all my college credits about a year or so later, a year and a half later, to a Bible college. So I got a theology degree. And and by the way, when I graduated, I had almost a 4.0 GPA when I got my theology degree. Now, this is an important thing for you to know, that your pastor did well in Bible college. Because the last thing you want to know is you're like, well, as far as knowing the Bible, they were working on a very gracious scale over there. He barely made it. But no, I did well. I did well in school. And so every time my wife tells the story of how we met, she says, "Well, Bob and I, our relationship started entirely with a bunch of lies." And I said, "No, it wasn't a lie. It was a prophecy." And because I loved school, I did eventually love school, and so much so that after I graduated, I spent about 4 years running a college before coming and starting Calvary. Now, I tell you this because my daughter Mia, who's now 12, since I can remember, has just loved hearing the story of how my wife and I met. And so she always wants to hear the story, and sometimes at dinner, she'll just say, "Dad, tell us a story. Tell us something about your life." And, because I happen to have a bunch of crazy things that have happened to me. And so I'll just start talking about, something, and they just think it's hilarious. And tell us another one until I can't remember anything. Well, anyway, so I was about 9 years old. I'm sorry, my daughter was 9 years old. And she came to this realization that I lied to her mom. And so I come home one day, and my daughter Mia is mad at me in a way that only a woman can be mad, bringing up something from 20 years ago and holding it against me in the present. And that night I couldn't do anything right. And so we sit down to have dinner. Mia's getting everybody something to drink. And I say, I'll have water, please. And she's like, "Are you sure you want water? Or are you just lying to me like you lied to my mom when you met her?" So I kind of laugh and move on. It's kind of a weird thing to say. And so we're eating dinner. Carrie asked me about my day. I'm like, it was actually a really good day. I got a lot done. And she's like, Mom, do you really believe that he got a lot done, that it was a good day? Or is this another one of his lies? Like when he lied to you about liking school. And then I was like, okay, why don't you throttle it back, Mia? And then we're getting ready for bed, and we put the kids to bed, pray for them, and so I'm getting ready to turn off the light. I'm like, I love you, Mia, good night. And she says, do you love me? Or is it another one of your lies, like when you met my mom? And I said, Mia, okay, I wasn't a Christian when I met your mom. I became a Christian about 6 months after I met your mom. So yes, I lied, but I didn't know any better. So you gotta relax. She's like, okay, Dad, I understand. Or maybe this is another one of your lies, like the day you met my mom. And here's the thing, right, is that this thing, it wasn't a lie, it was a prophecy. Prophecies are funny things because they don't always make sense when you hear them. And the thing about prophecies that have already come to pass is that we can look at them, examine them, and then realize that's what God was doing in this moment here, and it all kind of comes into focus. And so we've been in this series that we started last week that's called Spoiler Alert. We've been talking about Bible prophecy, and we've been talking specifically about the words of Jesus when he spoke about his return. As Christians, this is one of the things that we believe, that Jesus is coming back. And so today we're going to talk about a period of time that Jesus spoke about that is called the Great Tribulation. And what does that mean? But for us to understand that period of time in the future, we really have to go back to the past to understand it. And how far back? Back to about 539 BC, when Israel has been in captivity in Babylon. Now, Israel's in captivity in Babylon. There's this leader by the name of Daniel who is praying because he says, God, you said it was going to be 70 years. The time is almost up. What are you going to do next in our life as a nation? Are you going to bring us back? And so Daniel is given this prophecy that is just, it is just so deadly accurate that, we're going to pull back and be like, this is one of these moments like, wow, sometimes God shows up, sometimes God shows off. And this is one of those moments where it's like, wow, this guy, like people might have thought he was insane or he really heard from God. This guy really heard from God. So it's in your notes in Daniel 9. We're going to start in verse 24. Here's what we read. He says, 70 weeks are determined for your people and for your holy city. Now notice 6 things. To finish the transgression, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Now, he says, know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the command to restore and build Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. And the street shall be built again, and the wall, even in troublesome times. And after the 62 weeks, the Messiah shall be cut off, but not for himself. And the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end of it shall be with a flood. Until the end of the war, desolations are determined. Then he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week. But in the middle of the week, he will bring an end to the sacrifice and offering. If you pause there and give me your attention. Now, I know you read that and you're like, that's just so simple. Does that even need explanation? And now it sounds very confusing, but we're going to break this down. And as we break it down, be like, okay, I understand what you're saying. So we're talking about the Great Tribulation, but the first thing we need to know is that the Great Tribulation brings a specific timeline. A specific timeline. Now, I know sometimes many of you take notes, and I'm happy about that. I need everybody to take notes because if not, you're going to, at the end, you're going to be like, he said something about a year and a day, and then, you're going to tell somebody about this, and it's going to be all wrong. And by the way, if you brought a calculator, you'd be like, I've been bringing a calculator to church every day. This is the 1 week where you're like, I'm so glad I brought a calculator. Anyway, so now, it says 70 weeks. You may want to circle that word weeks. The Hebrew word is the word Shabua, S-H-A-B-U-A. In English, we count years in terms of 10, right? Decades, we count donuts in terms of dozen, and we mean 12. So, or at least that's how I count donuts. But that's, in Hebrew, when they count years instead of decade, they count by sevens. So a 7, they see it, that a Shabua is a week of years. So God is telling Daniel 70 Shabuas, 77-year periods are determined for, you may want to circle this, your people, who are Daniel's people, the Jewish people, for your holy city. What is Daniel's holy city? Jerusalem, obviously. And so let's make, so here's what we got to do. So he says it's 70, 7-year period. So it's 70 times 7. Let's bring our giant chalkboard up. So 70 times 7 equals 490. And if you have a calculator, you can feel free to double check my math. And but he says within these 490 years, the plan of redemption is going to be completed. All right? But there's something to note here in verse 24. Remember I showed you that there were 6 things. But it's kind of broken up into these 2 categories. The first 3, finish transgression, make an end of sin, and reconciliation for iniquity. That's what Jesus accomplished in his first coming. He died on the cross. He rose again from the dead, finishing transgression, making an end of sin, reconciling humanity with our Father in heaven. But what about these last 3? To bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, to anoint the most holy. These are things that have not happened yet. These are things that are happening in Jesus' second coming. Now, in verse 25, he says, know therefore and understand. And he's going to give us basically a word problem. And if you remember word problems when you were in school, I was not a big fan of those. I always found them very frustrating because the world does not work this way. But you know how it was. Like, Joe is 2 years older than Carmencita. Carmencita is half of her mom's age. How old is her dad? Like, I don't know. Just ask the dad. Like, you don't even have to do this, So, all right. So here's how it works. Is that here's the word problem. From the going forth of the command to restore and build Jerusalem until the Messiah is 7 weeks and 62 weeks. So you take those together, 69 weeks, it's 483 years. Here's that. So 69 weeks or 483 years. The cool thing is this. We actually know what day this happened. The day that the command was given. That's when the clock starts to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. It was given on March 14, 445 BC. That King Artaxerxes gave this command to a guy by the name of Nehemiah. And if you're not familiar with him, he's got a whole book out. And Nehemiah says, all right, a few of you are going to, really? Okay, you're going to get that. All right, it's all right. This afternoon, you're going to eat lunch. You'll be like, I get it now. That's so good. Anyway, so he tells Nehemiah, you can read this in the Bible, you can read this in history. He gives this command for Nehemiah to go back and rebuild the wall of Jerusalem. That's when the clock starts, 483 years. But we have to be a little more precise because the Jewish people work on a 360-day lunar calendar. So if we really want to be precise down to the day, we should take those 483 years, multiply it by 360 days of the lunar calendar, we get 173,880 days. Now, why is that important? Because he says from the command that's given until Messiah the Prince is these 173,880 days. But look at what it says in verse 25 about the Messiah. After the 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off. And if you want to circle that word cut off, here's what that means in Hebrew. It means suffer the death penalty. So the prophecy that's being given, once again, this is wild. That they're saying, there's lots of prophecies about the Messiah coming. They're saying the Messiah is going to suffer the death penalty. But look at what it says, but not for himself and the people of the prince who is to come. That is this kingdom coming after the Persians, which is the Roman Empire. They shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. So let's go back to March 14, 445 BC. Let's fast forward 173,880 days. That leads us to April 6th, 32 AD. So that begs the question, something exciting must have happened on April 6, 32 AD, or it really would have been a huge letdown. But so let me explain it this way. So when you read the Bible, if you've ever read the Gospels, one of the things that you'll find is, and this is like over and over, Jesus will do something, he'll heal somebody. And then he'll say, by the way, don't tell anybody. And then what do? They go out and tell everybody. It's like, dude, I just helped you out. Why are you not listening to what I'm telling you? Anyway, but then, they're at a wedding and there's no wine at the wedding. And then he said, Jesus' mom, Mary, says, can you help these guys out? And what does he say? Not like I can't do it or it's not in my schedule. He says, it's not my time. He keeps saying it's not my time. My hour has not come until this one day when he shows up, rides into Jerusalem on a donkey on April 6th, 32 AD, and proclaims himself to be the Messiah. And listen, at other times they try to, not me, don't make a big deal. And now people are worshiping him. They're laying out palm branches because they believe that this was the day. They start quoting this messianic psalm, Psalm 118, and particularly in verse 24, where it says, "This is the day the Lord has made. I will rejoice and be glad in it." And I know that Christians, a lot of times, they think that verse means any day that they don't have to work. Like Saturday, "This is the day the Lord has made." Like, no, that's not really what that's about. It's actually a messianic psalm that this is the day that the Messiah shows up in Israel. But see, here's the thing. The people understood God's timing. That's why they were there that day. That this was the day that Daniel's prophecy was going to be fulfilled. This is the day that he spoke of. But see, if that's the 7 weeks and 62, that's 69 weeks, that's 483 years, but there's still one 7-year period left. So I want you to think about God's time clock not as just a clock, but as like a stopwatch. The clock starts 445, or March 14, 445 BC, April 6, 32 AD, stop. And now we've been living in this other period of time until the clock starts again, and there's another 7-year period. Now listen, I don't say this to freak you out, and anytime someone shares Bible prophecy for the purpose of freaking you out, there's always some ulterior motive. But listen, let me tell you something. Whenever the Bible talks about Jesus' return, in the book of 1 Thessalonians, which we studied a few years ago here at Calvary, one of the things, when he talks about Jesus' coming, the rapture, all these great things that are going to happen, here's what the Bible says: "Comfort one another with these words, that Jesus coming back and taking all of the wrongs of this world and making them right shouldn't be something that instills fear in us. It should be something that comforts us, because we know that whatever is wrong in this world, he's going to make it right." Now, there's a 7-year period, but if you remember in that passage in Daniel, it says that he, this other person that's going to show up on the scene, is going to confirm a covenant for 1 week. That's the 1 week that's left, the 7-year period. And it says this: "But in the middle of the week, he's going to bring an end to sacrifice and offering." Now, I have to share all of that up front, because as we go to the section of Scripture that we've been studying in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 24 and 25, he's going to talk about that last 7 years, but we had to have that little background for us to take a running start. So let's start in verse 15 of Matthew 24. "Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, whoever reads, let him understand. Let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him who is on the housetop not go down to take anything out of his house. And let him who is in the field not go back to get his clothes, but woe to those who are pregnant and nursing babies in those days, and pray that your flight may not be in the winter or on the Sabbath, and there will be great tribulation, such as has not been since the beginning of the world, no, until that, nor shall ever shall be. But unless those days were shortened, no flesh would be saved, but for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened." Now, if you pause there and give me your attention, there's a lot that we're going to cover, and in a future message, we're going to dive even deeper into this. But I just want to take one slice of this and explore it a little bit. And that is this: that the Great Tribulation brings, here's the first thing we said, was that it brings a specific timeline. The second thing is that the Great Tribulation brings a new Jewish temple. Now, how many of you were here last week, if I can ask that? Okay, excellent. Many of you. 5 extra points for all of you. And if you weren't, now I don't know how you can redeem those points just yet, but we're going to work something out. And anyway, if you missed last week, can I just encourage you to go on YouTube and watch the video, or get our podcast or whatever, because I think it's really going to help you put all this together. But if you were here last week, one of the things that I told you was that this whole conversation about the end of the world starts when the disciples of Jesus are showing him all the buildings of the temple. But then Jesus says this kind of disconcerting phrase. He says, you see all this? Not one stone will be left upon another. So then they come to Jesus privately for this private briefing, and they ask 3 questions. When is that going to happen, the destruction of the temple? And what will be the sign of your coming and the sign of the end of the age? And last week we said, look, I need you to put a tack in the destruction of the temple part, because we're going to get back to that. So I want you to untack that, because we're going to deal with it right now. So in 66 AD, the Jews rebelled against Rome, and this was it was a whole tax issue anyway. Even back then, people weren't interested in taxes. But the taxation was ridiculous in that era. But anyway, the Jews rebelled against Rome in 66 AD. Nero, who was the Roman emperor, ordered a very decorated general whose name was Vespasian to put down the insurrection. About 2 years into the campaign, so this is now 68 AD, Nero dies. And this guy was a total lunatic, which we'll talk about him another time. Vespasian has to go back to Rome because he's going to be crowned the emperor of Rome. So he decides when he leaves, he sends his son Titus and the Roman 10th Legion to finish the job. So now, about 4 years after it all started, it's about 70 AD, August 30th, Roman soldiers set fire to the temple. And now, you got to understand that the Jewish temple, the building itself, the temple proper, was all encased in gold. All of the instruments that were used were all gold. So what happens when you throw fire into this temple that's encased in gold? Well, all the gold begins to melt. Now, what happens with this gold that's melting in all of these rocks? And so it starts going into the cracks and crevices of the temple because it's built on all of this stone. But I want to remind you what Jesus said. He didn't just say, well, the temple is going to be destroyed. There was much more specificity in what he was saying. He was saying, not one stone will be left upon another. Because when you are a Roman soldier who gets paid in plunder, they go in, and now when the riots start, because the temple's on fire, they go in and they start pulling apart the temple brick by brick, literally, to get all of the gold that's found in between them. In fact, if you go to Israel, right at the edge of the Temple Mount, there's a valley that's called the Valley of Kidron, and in the Valley of Kidron, some of the stones are still there that were part of the second temple that was destroyed. Now, I said it was August 30th, 70 AD. In the Jewish calendar, it's called the 9th of Av. Now, what's interesting for us to note, if you're kind of into scholarly type of Bible things, and that is the 9th of Av is the same day that the first temple was destroyed by the Babylonians. The temple gets rebuilt, the temple gets enlarged, and on the 9th of Av, again, a few hundred years later, the temple is destroyed. So, for close to 2,000 years, the Jews have not had a temple to worship in, but I want you to notice what Jesus says when he says, therefore, which is connecting it to the first 14 verses, wars, rumors of wars, deception, all this stuff. But he says, therefore, in light of that, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, that there is going to be a third temple that's built. Now, Jesus mentions the third temple, but he says, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place. And I love Matthew gives us this little parenthetical phrase, whoever reads, let him understand. That there's actually this connection of two things that Daniel wrote that Jesus is drawing from. So I read you the first one, that there's a covenant, it's broken halfway through, so it's 3.5 years into a 7-year covenant. And look here's the second one. It's in Daniel 11, I put it in your notes. It says, his armed forces will rise up to desecrate the temple fortress and will abolish the daily sacrifice. Then they will set up the abomination that causes desolation. With flattery, he will corrupt those who have violated the covenant, but the people who know their God will firmly resist him. Now here's the cool thing, is that history gives us a picture of what will happen in the future. 167 BC, there's this guy named Antiochus Epiphanes. He conquers Jerusalem. He makes the practice of Judaism illegal in Israel, confiscates all Jewish money, and forbids the teaching of the Torah. In his worst act, because he just couldn't stand the Jewish people or the practice of the worship of the God of the Jews, he goes into the temple and sacrifices a pig on the altar. So they called him the madman. That's what the Jews called him. But because he confiscates all the Jewish currency, he has his own coin printed, which you'll see right here. And this is stuff that's been discovered many years ago. But it says Antiochus Theos Epiphanes, literally, which means Antiochus, the God made manifest. This is a picture from history of what we see what will happen to a greater scale in the future. That this is what happens when a future world leader, who the Bible calls Antichrist, comes in and makes some kind of treaty with Israel, maybe giving Israel peace with her enemies, allows the Jewish temple to be rebuilt, and there's actually a way for that to happen. And we're going to, in the future message in this series, we're going to talk about all the preparations that are being made, and that there's actually a way that the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem could stand, and the Jewish temple could stand on the same area. We'll talk about that in a future message, but it's going to be a fun time. And but 3.5 years into this, he will walk into the temple, offer some kind of sacrifice that will defile the temple and reveal himself for who he really is. And here's the thing that Jesus says to his Jewish listeners: when you see this, run. Now, why does God do this? Now, I want to talk about not just this, but just the idea of prophecy in general. God uses the canvas of history and predicts the future prophetically to show us that he is trustworthy, that we can trust him, that he has the power to know the end from the beginning. And what happens is that when we don't, we end up missing out on everything that God could do. So I'll give you an example. One night I was making dinner, and this was when a couple years ago my wife sprained her ankle. She almost broke it, and she was walking around with, those little scooters that people have when they sprain their ankle or whatever. Anyway, my wife was rocking one of those scooters for a couple months. And so this was like one of the first times that she could stand enough to be able to help me make dinner. And so now, mind you, it had been a rough situation in my house for a good bit, because my kids, they would just give me a number from 0 to 10 as to how good my dinner was. So it's like, like Chopped. Give me a break. I've lived it. And so if you ever watched any of those shows from the Food Channel, like, I was living higher stakes than that, every night. I mean, my kids, and listen, there was no like, well, you did a good job. No, it was just savage, boom, horrible, anyway, or good, whatever. There was it wasn't like, come on, man, we're family. There was nothing. It was like, I got to tell the truth. And so anyway, so I buy these tuna steaks, and I'm going to sear them on the grill. Turned out great. And so at the time, my daughter, Mia, who's 9 or 10 or so, she says, Dad, dinner was great. Was a 10, totally delicious. You are amazing at grilling, and now I am feeling good about myself. And then my daughter, Livy, who's 4 at the time, she turns her head, and she had taken one bite. She's like, you didn't make this. I'm like, yes, I did. No, you didn't make this. I'm like, yes, I did. I'm like, I grilled this. Your mom helped me season it, and she made the sauce or whatever, but she's like, no, you didn't eat this, and because it's really good, because my mom is a really good cook, and you are horrible. And that's what I said. You wonder why I have low self-esteem. It's because of my children. But this is what happens, right? Is that we have this thing, and I don't want to do it because we don't believe. And this is the challenge, and this is one of the reasons why Bible prophecy exists. Listen to this. In Isaiah chapter 46, here's what God says. I am God, there is none like me. I make known the end from the beginning, from ancient times, what is still to come. And let me tell you what happens is sometimes we miss out on everything that God has for us because we think God is not totally aware of our situation. And can I tell you something? Not only is God very well aware of your situation, he understands your situation better than you understand your situation as it is. Because there's this thing like, God, do you see what's going on? Like, yeah, not only do I see what's going on, I see what's happening 3 weeks from now. It's like, yeah, but I need you to answer it this way. Like, nah, based on this other thing, you don't want to answer it like that. And here's the challenge, is that to the degree that we will trust is to the degree that we will triumph. And that's why Bible prophecy is so powerful, because it's one of the ways that God proves his power and reveals his ability to transform a situation by calling it before it even happens. And so if we recognize, listen, if we could just live with this idea that if God is predicting human events, like world events before they happen, certainly God understands my situation. And if God can move the course of history and things happen exactly the way he said, then certainly I can trust him with what's happening in my life right now. Well, look at what happens. In verse 23, Jesus goes on. He says, then if anyone says to you, look, here is the Christ, or there, do not believe it. For false Christs and false messiahs will rise up to show great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. See, I told you beforehand. Therefore, if they say to you, look, he's in the desert, do not go out. Or look, he's in the inner rooms, do not believe it. For as lightning comes from the east and flashes to the west, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. For wherever the carcass is, there the eagles or vultures will be gathered together. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. Now here's the key. Now, learn this parable from the fig tree. When its branch has already become tender and put forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. So you also, when you see all these things, know that it is near, even at the doors. Assuredly, I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away. The generation that sees these things, until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will by no means pass away. And if you pause there and give me your attention, last thing, great tribulation brings great promise. Listen, the big criticism that people have, that Christians who believe Jesus is coming back is, well, didn't every generation think that they were living in the last days? And the reality is, and I would say yes, that's true. However, not every generation could say that Jesus could come back any day, including today. Because certain prophecies had to be fulfilled. If you and I were believers living in the 1500s, that wasn't the moment for him to come back. Israel did not even exist as a nation. And Israel is the key to Bible prophecy. And if you heard the message last week, we talked about that. All of Bible prophecy speaks of Israel as a nation, and that did not happen until May 14th of 1948, when Israel gained its independence. After the horrors of World War II, Nazi Germany, and the Holocaust, the world community understood this never would have happened had Israel had its own homeland. And God now starts gathering people from the four corners of the earth in fulfillment of another prophecy about Israel returning. You see it in Ezekiel 34. I'll read it to you. It's in your notes. But he says, for this is what the sovereign Lord says. I myself will search for my sheep and look after them, as a shepherd looks after his scattered flock when he's with them. So I will look after my sheep. I will rescue them from all the places where they were scattered on a day of clouds and darkness. I will bring them out of the nations and gather them from the countries, and I will bring them into their own land. I will pasture them in the mountains of Israel, in the ravines, and in all the settlement of the land. 70 A.D. marks what is called the diaspora. That is a Greek word that means the scattering, when Jews were scattered throughout the entire earth. What's amazing for us to understand is that up until 2010, so just a few years ago, there were more Jews living outside of Israel than in Israel. Today, there's more Jews in Israel than anywhere else in the world. And what's amazing is, listen, in 1918, about a little over 100 years ago, there was 85,000 people, Jewish people, living in what today is called Israel. Today, over 8 million. And so you see this happen. Listen, here's why this is amazing. Because no people group has ever lasted more than 3 centuries and maintained their national identity without having a homeland. Now let me say that again, just to say, it's like, what? What does that mean? That no group of people has been able to maintain national identity for longer than 3 centuries and not have their own homeland. So that means, like, I don't know, have you ever met an Assyrian? Probably not. Why? The Assyrians don't exist anymore. Have you ever met a Canaanite? Have you ever met a Hittite? Have you ever met an Uptite? A few of those guys still around. All right. But I bet that you've probably met someone who's Egyptian. Why? Because they still have a homeland, and because they have a homeland, they've been able to maintain national identity. Israel went 1,900 years without a homeland and was able to keep their national identity. So what happens now? Israel's in the land, they're flourishing, and this is exactly what Jesus said. Learn the parable from the fig tree. Throughout the Bible, the symbol for Israel is the fig tree. He's saying, when you see Israel in the land bearing fruit, prospering, growing, you know that my coming is near. Israel is literally a land flowing with milk and honey. And if you've ever been there, it is an incredible place. They are one of the leading exporters in the world of fruit and vegetables, the number one exporter in Europe. They are the Silicon Valley of the Middle East when it comes to technological innovations. And listen, they are prospering in the way that God has said that they would. And here's the thing that's amazing. Next time that we're together, we're going to talk about the social factors that show us that we're getting close to the end. Because most people, by the way, and I'm not just talking about Christians or theologians, I'm talking about people that don't believe in God at all, are saying that our world is unraveling. Because we have the ability to wipe out humanity several times over through weapons, biochemical warfare, AI, countries with nuclear capabilities or nuclear ambitions. So, 1947, a group of scientists get together and put together something that's called the Doomsday Clock. The Doomsday Clock, what they do, this group, they take in conflict, threats, the capacity for human annihilation, they take it into account, and they put it into a clock and set the clock. Midnight is total human destruction. Then what they do is they set the clock as close to midnight depending on how volatile the world is. So this thing starts in 1947. And they set it at 7 minutes to midnight. Now, what was happening in 1947? 1947 was right after World War II. America had dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan to end the war. It was the beginning of the Cold War with the United States and Russia. Now, the furthest back that it ever went was in 1991. You'll see it. It was 17 minutes to midnight. And the reason for that was this was right after the Berlin Wall went down. This was after the fall of the Soviet Union happened that year. The closest we ever got was in 1953, and it was set at 2 minutes to midnight. This was at the height of the Cold War. The arms race between the United States and Russia was at full speed. The U.S. had just tested its first hydrogen bomb, so they set the doomsday clock to 2 minutes to midnight. That was 66 years ago. 2 weeks ago, they updated, and it goes back and forth every year, and it just kept getting closer. It was like 3 minutes, 2.5 minutes, and 2 weeks ago, they set the clock. It's 2 minutes to midnight again. And it was 2 minutes to midnight in 2018. It was 2.5 minutes to midnight in 2017, and it just keeps going. Why? And I don't say this to frighten you. It shouldn't frighten you. This is exactly what Jesus said. We're getting closer to the end. The leaders of our world understand that our world is unraveling, and human ingenuity isn't fixing it. If more laws could fix spiritual problems, it would have worked already. And because it doesn't, what does that mean for us? What does it mean for us? There's a reason for this. If you're a Christian, once again, it should comfort us to know that God is in control, but there's something else that it should do. This is the last verse in your outline in 1 John chapter 3. Here's what we read. Dear friends, now we are children of God, and what we will be has not been made known. But we know that when Christ appears, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. And all who have this hope purify themselves just as he is pure. I want you to understand that. Here's what that means. That the point, listen, the knowledge that Jesus could come back at any moment, the knowledge that our world is unraveling, what it should do, according to this, is prompt us to live the way that we're called to live. If you're a Christian, that means that we start doing the things that God has called us to do, that we are serving and sharing, that we're committed to a local church to be salt and light in this world. And if you're not a Christian, let me tell you what that means. This is your moment to believe and be ready, because it's 2 minutes to midnight. Even people who aren't Christians, don't even believe in God, recognize that it's 2 minutes to midnight. And I don't know what else God has to do to show us that this world is a mess. And can I tell you something? We understand that because we know this. Our life is a mess without him. That's why we need him to come into our lives. And listen, we have no idea in our individual lives how many minutes to midnight it is. But I know this, that when we hear this, today is the day to decide, to say, God God put me here. This message was given in this moment because God wants to do something in my life, to transform my life and transform my eternity. Let's pray together. Lord, we want to thank you. Thanks for loving us. Thanks for telling us beforehand, proving that you can be trusted. And so, Lord, we pray for those of us that need to make a decision to follow you, God. I pray that this would be our moment in our time. May we hear your voice now and take a step in your direction. Listen, with every head bowed and every eye closed as we're praying together, if you say, Pastor, that's me. I need Jesus to come into my life. I need him to transform my life. Then listen, I want to pray for you as we close. So with every head bowed and every eye closed, if you say, Pastor, pray for me, just lift your hand. I want to pray for you right now as we close. Yeah, lift them up right now. Lots of hands. God bless you guys. Lord, I want to thank you for every hand that's lifted that represents a heart that is ready, that recognizes it's 2 minutes to midnight, that your son is returning, and we want to be ready. So God, as these hearts call out to you, may you hear, may you act, and may you respond, and may our lives never be the same as we leave this place different than how we came in. Those of you that lifted a hand, I want to invite you to pray this prayer with me out loud. In fact, we're all going to pray it together. It's not a magic formula. It's a prayer of commitment that if you will pray in sincerity, God will hear you and answer you and transform your life. How do I know? Because it's the prayer I prayed, and God changed my life, and I know that he can change yours. So we're all going to pray it out loud together. Just say, Dear God, I come to you today. I ask that you forgive me of all I've done wrong. I thank you for Jesus, who died for me, that I might have life. I want to walk with you, starting right now. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen.
Thanks for watching this week's message. Make sure to click the subscribe button below to stay up to date with all the things happening here at Calvary. God bless you.